Hello and welcome along. So today we're going to talk about Luther. So Luther is famously the man who betrayed the lion and led a large proportion of the Dark Angels into treachery and the worship of chaos. So what led up to Luther's fall? What turned the lion's most loyal friend into the arch betrayer? What part did the lion have in leading Luther down this path? And just why did so many Dark Angels follow him? Now, amongst all of the legions, the Dark Angels had the highest proportion turn against their Primarch. No other legion had so many, roughly half the legion. Luther was a member of a knightly order on the planet of Caliban. Now, this is the planet that the Lion would crash land on as a baby in his Primarch pod and grow up on. And Luther was renowned, acclaimed even as a knight amongst the order. And the order was one of many knightly groups, houses on the planet of Caliban. They were rivals, but also and fought with each other from time to time, although large-scale warfare was relatively rare. And they had a strict code of honor, a sort of chivalry code similar to medieval Europe, which they followed. And their society was very similar to a kind of a medieval Europe. However, they did have remnants of technology. So they did have primitive forms of bolt guns and power swords and chain swords and other things like that, even sorts of power armor that were somewhat similar to that of an Astarte, but all just less capable. And they used this equipment to hunt massive warp-corrupted beasts, which they called the Great Beasts. And that was a deep part of their culture, particularly the knight. So it was a coming-of-age kind of thing. You had to kill one of these beasts to become a knight. And it was extremely dangerous, and there's a good chance you'd be severely injured or even killed in these quests. And Luther had completed this as a boy and had become a knight, and was extremely impressive as a knight. So he was respected by the other knights, and he was known to be very charismatic, a natural leader, humorous, calm, logical, but very skillful in both combat and tactics. He was essentially the perfect knight, someone who was destined for greatness on Caliban. And now into this comes the lion. Luther is out one day hunting with a small group of knights, and they come across the lion. Now, the lion's been living feral in the wilderness for about 10 years. So he can't speak. He is very, very disheveled and wild looking, very long hair, matted. He doesn't look particularly human, and the way he moves as a Primarch obviously makes him look unusual as well, because he's incredibly fast and strong. This small group of knights mistake him for some kind of monster. They try to attack him, corner him, and they intend to kill him. And at this stage in the lion's life, even though he is a Primarch and obviously very dangerous compared to a 10-year-old boy, he is still vulnerable, and in theory they could have killed him. However, at the moment that they corner him, Luther steps in and notices something about him that he thinks isn't quite right. He sees beyond the monster, and he puts down his weapon and saves the lion basically by stopping his comrades from trying to kill him. At this point, he basically adopts the lion. He takes him back to the knight stronghold, where he treats him essentially as a son. And you'll see this in many cases of Primarchs. They often are adopted essentially by some powerful member of society where they land, and they become a kind of adopted son. Now, this kind of happened with Luther, although he never officially adopts him as his son. He just treats him like a son to start with. Now, because the lion is already 10, and as a Primarch they mature relatively quickly, he wouldn't be like the size of a 10-year-old boy. He wouldn't really be considered a child, but he had many ways the mind of a child, because he hadn't been given any exposure to people to learn from. But being a Primarch, he very rapidly develops, and it's not long before he's surpassing everybody in both physical capabilities, but also mental capabilities. So he learns to speak very quickly. He takes on the new skills that they teach him. He becomes one of them very, very quickly, and he's now considered a knight. And the relationship with Luther does change, and he becomes more like a brother to Luther. And they remain very, very close, and they are best friends. They are considered a very good team. They bring out the best in each other, and people generally admire them greatly. And together they rise through the ranks of the order, and to the point where they are leading the order essentially together. There isn't a distinctive hierarchy between them, but as time goes by, Luther's role becomes more of a supporting role because the Lion is just so incredible as a Primarch. He can do things that Luther could never hope to do. And even though Luther is this incredibly impressive human, he is still limited at being an unenhanced human. Now, together, the Lion and Luther launch a campaign, a 10-year campaign to rid Caliban of the Great Beasts, which they think is the key to progress on Caliban, and that they have to be eliminated. And by and large, this goes pretty well, although it does take a long time because Caliban is essentially a wilderness world. It's a death world. It's not easy to get things done quickly. The society is essentially a medieval society. It takes a long time to cover the whole planet, but they get to the point where almost all of the beasts have been hunted down and killed. And throughout this 10-year period, the Lion has been becoming more and more important, more and more hailed as this great hero of Caliban. And although Luther is taking an equal part in many ways in this campaign, his role is becoming more and more superseded, and he is becoming more being put into the shadow of the Lion more and more. But throughout this period, it is said that Luther still held no bitterness and never showed any sign of jealousy at all towards the Lion. So he was his genuine friend. He genuinely wanted the Lion's plans to come to fruition. He decided, I'm just going to play my part in together achieving these things, and I don't need the limelight. I don't need to be the great hero that the Lion is now going to be. At the end of this period, they had almost achieved their goals, and there was one last holdout group of knights who refused to follow this plan, and they were actually turned out to be breeding and keeping these great beasts because they didn't want to give up the lifestyle that they had become accustomed to, which was something that they felt was very important, a traditional way of life of the knight. And without the great beasts, you couldn't have the knight. So there was one great final battle where the Order and the various others that they'd managed to bring to their flag fought against this remaining knight, the group, the Knights of Lupus. And it was a huge battle by the standards of Caliban of that day, and many died. It was very bloody, and however, they were victorious. Now, Luther led the main front in this battle and was victorious. However, all of the plaudits went to the Lion, and this was the first time that Luther felt any feelings of jealousy. He felt like just a tiny twinge of jealousy that he'd done this great thing, this last final battle that he'd won essentially. And although the Lion had played his part in it too, it was the Lion that was getting all of the plaudits, and Luther was forgotten. And he did feel a little bit jealous at this point. And although it quickly passed, it wasn't a big thing. It was that first time he noticed it. Shortly after this, the Emperor turns up on Caliban. So now things are going to change pretty rapidly for everybody, including Luther. Very shortly, the Emperor gives the Lion command over the Dark Angels. So on taking command of the Dark Angels, who at that time were just known as the First Legion, he names them the Dark Angels, which is a name that comes from the legends of Caliban. And he wants, obviously, to carry on the traditions of the Order to some extent, and the things that he thinks are valuable from the Order and the other knightly groups, and incorporate them into the Legion. So he tries to fuse them together, and he does that somewhat successfully. But the main issue at this time is that a lot of the members of the Order and the other knights are too old to become Astartes. So, of course, an Astarte generally is implanted with gene seed roughly around puberty, just before. And this obviously can't happen because most of them are adult men who've long since passed through puberty and will never be able to become true Astartes. However, they are very talented, skillful people, and the Dark Angels do incorporate quite a few of them into the Legion. So they're given in other ways of enhancing them. So they are enhanced well beyond a normal human, but they aren't ever going to be quite as good as an Astarte. And Luther is one of those who receives these enhancements. So he does become a member of the Legion, and in fact, second in command of the Legion very rapidly because of his closeness to the Lion and of all of the things he's achieved. But he's never quite going to be an Astarte. And this does cause a little bit of a rift, this first inkling of a rift within the Legion. So you have the true Astartes, and you have these false Astartes who are just not quite as good. And this causes both resentment from the actual true Astartes who will see these guys as kind of not quite good enough. And these knights themselves, who have gone from this role where they were the most respected, the most skillful, the best of the best, to being just not quite as good. And what makes this worse is now the younger ones in the order are being made into true Astartes, and they will then surpass their leaders, their teachers, very quickly. And this also adds a little bit of salt in the wound. So it's kind of like just festering in the background, this kind of division, as well as these initial divisions that you can start to see within the Legion developing. There's also a wider problem on Caliban, and that is twofold. One, Caliban is essentially a corrupted world. It's very close to the Eye of Terror, and one of the symptoms of this is these warped, corrupted great beasts. But the planet itself is affected by chaos, is corrupted by chaos, and it's kind of there under the surface. Also, the way that the Imperium treats people, newly conquered people or newly incorporated people into the Imperium, is very rough. It doesn't do much for appreciating others' cultures and integrating them slowly into the Imperium. So as soon as Caliban becomes part of the Imperium, it's essentially bulldozed. So the surface of the planet is rapidly transformed from this massive forest wilderness into an industrialized planet to serve the Great Crusade. So you've got massive new mines, refineries, factories, and huge new habitats all being built. The people are being relocated, somewhat voluntarily, but essentially you kind of have to do it because once the Imperium says you do something, you do it. And so they're being relocated from their small villages and towns from a somewhat farming subsistence lifestyle and hunting to working in a factory or a mine and living in a city, which is it's a complete and radical change to their society happening over a very short period of time. They can physically see the landscape being bulldozed by these massive mechanicum machines. And they can also see, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, perhaps even millions of the population being taken away as recruits for the Imperial army, who, once you join the Imperial army, it's essentially you don't come back. There's a good chance you don't come back. You might die, but it's also the campaigns are so long and you go so far that you often end up being resettled on another world somewhere. So you can imagine how this feels for the people left behind on Caliban. Like they've had their society completely turned over. So many of the people that they knew have gone. Their sons and some of their daughters have been taken away into the Imperial army, and they're just living a completely alien life. And this creates a great deal of resentment amongst the population of Caliban. And it's just there in the background because they know they at this stage it's too early to be openly rebelling, and they do greatly admire the Lion and the Order and Luther, so they are willing to go along with it, but it's there in the background, just waiting to be a problem. So the Lion is very keen to get on with the Great Crusade and doesn't really give a second thought to Caliban. And as soon as the Legion is ready and has enough new recruits, they set off to join the Crusade. And one of the early engagements they take part in is the kind of continuing of a compliance of a world where the White Scars have seemingly achieved victory and the world is waiting to be sort of incorporated into the Imperium. So all the work seems to have been done, and essentially all the Line needs to do is take the official incorporation of this new world into the Imperium from their leadership. So the people are known as the Sosi. Everything seems fine. There's one final meeting to occur where the Sosi leadership will officially become incorporated into the Imperium, and a delegation has been sent up to the Lion's flagship on a shuttle, and it turns out that in fact it's all a trap. And the plan of the Sosi is to blow up their shuttle, which has a nuke on board, and destroy the flagship of the Legion, thereby killing the Lion and the leadership of the Legion in one fell swoop. And then there'll be a massive planet-wide rebellion timed for the same time to kill anyone on any Imperial citizens that are down on the planet, and they will then have their freedom back. It turns out that they're secretly Chaos worshippers, although they don't entirely know that they're Chaos worshippers. They obviously worship supernatural beings of some form, which they consider to be the gods. And once being told about the Imperial truth, they immediately consider the Imperium to be evil and the enemies of their gods. And so, although they recognize the strength of the Imperium and that they can't immediately fight back, they decide that at some point they've got to take action, and this is their plan. Now, by some chance, Luther comes across this shuttle and realizes that it is a booby trap. Now, he realizes there's this bomb on board and what's going to happen. And so, in a brief moment of weakness, it occurs to him if he just leaves the ship, the Lion will die, and he will be next in command. He will take command of the Legion, and he will, and more importantly, command of Caliban, and he will have everything that he would have had the Lion not existed. And he has this brief realization that if not for the Lion, he would be the greatest man on Caliban, and all of the things that the Lion now has are really should have been his. Now, this isn't like some long-term plot or anything he's been working on. It's just a brief moment of thought of like, oh, actually, yeah, what would happen if, it's a what if moment. If I just walked away, everything would happen without me having to do anything, and I would have everything I ever dreamed of. And he hadn't realized up to this point that he actually wanted these things, and it was the fact that seeing this bomb, and then obviously calculating what would happen, suddenly gives him it dawns on him this realization of what could be his, and he realizes that he wants that. But very quickly, he also realizes that would be wrong, and that's he can't do that, and he decides he's going to disarm the bomb and somehow save the Lion. So he does that with some help from Zariel, who is a Dark Angel's librarian. They manage to get the shuttle outside of the ship, basically eject it into space, and it blows up out there, causing no real damage. The rebellion happens on the planet, and it is a very bloody one, but eventually the Dark Angels prevail. And of course, Luther does his job throughout this period. He takes part in crushing the rebellion, and very successfully, and everything seems fine. However, after the events of this failed assassination attempt and rebellion by the Sosi, the Lion changes his behavior, and he doesn't explain exactly why, but he very rapidly distances himself from Luther. He doesn't seem to want to be around him, and he comes up with this new order that Luther and about 500 of the Dark Angels, mostly those who were recruited on Caliban, particularly the older ones, although not exclusively, have to go back to Caliban. Now, the pretense for this is that the speed of recruits coming from Caliban to supply the Great Crusade just isn't quick enough, and he wants them to go back and head up this recruitment process, speed it up, make it more effective, more efficient, etc. Now, this is very confusing for everybody involved, really, because this doesn't make a great deal of sense. There's already people back on Caliban doing this job, and it's traditionally the job of people that are not suitable for frontline service to do this kind of work, the older members or people who've had very bad injuries and so on, who can't serve on the front lines. Whereas these guys are all fit, capable Astartes, so they're like, well, why would I need to go back to be doing this training? It's kind of weird, but obviously they're loyal, they're trained Astartes, they take the orders and they go back to Caliban. Now, it's made even more confusing by the fact that Luther is being sent back, because everyone knows Luther is like this great man and this incredibly gifted, successful individual, and why would he be sent away from the front line where he's so needed and so be so useful, and of course is the Lion's best and closest friend? It makes it even more confusing to them. Well, what's going on? So even though Luther's actually saved the day, saved the Lion, saved the flagship of the fleet and everybody on board it, he's actually being punished. And these guys, these 500 other guys who came from Caliban, are also being punished just by association, really. And so this leads to yet another level of resentment being put into the Legion, another division where people kind of judge, the people that stayed behind with the Lion feel like they're slightly better than the people that were sent away in some sense. And there's a feeling of developed in the Legion that you can never cross the line in any way. You can never let him down. You can never do anything that is slightly out of line, because you'll be very severely judged and you'll never come back from it. Even Luther, his greatest friend and ally, can be so harshly punished for this for apparently doing nothing, that anybody's aware of, then you really are in trouble if you cross the line. So no, but so this feeds into the Legion's personality and the way that it looks upon the Lion and the way it looks upon those sent back to Caliban. So those that are sent back to Caliban under Luther's command, at first they decide, well, this is a job we're going to do. We'll be called back at some point after we've been here a suitable amount of time and we've got the speed of the recruitment process going, and etc. But unfortunately, that never happens. And 50 years go by, and they still haven't been recalled. And by now, they're feeling pretty abandoned, essentially. And not only have they never been recalled, they've never even been spoken to. So the Lion has never messaged them in 50 years. I mean, can you imagine that? The confusion that these guys must have gone through, and particularly Luther, obviously, thinking, well, why? Why is this even happening? And so they've done their job over this time. They've recruited lots of new Dark Angels. Some have gone off to the fleet. Some have remained on Caliban because as the process got more and more efficient, they were recruiting each batch of recruits, larger and larger batches. They were building up a kind of surplus of Astartes on the planet. And as I said, the Lion himself personally never contacted them again, and even the rest of the Legion, communication started to become less and less often, and they really just didn't know what was going on outside of Caliban after a while. So much so that they were never told about the heresy by the other members of the Legion. They eventually came to know of it, but the communication between this group on Caliban and the wider Legion had completely stopped. Now, this led to both those legionaries that had been sent back becoming more bitter and more resentful towards the Lion, but also to those people outside of the Legion who were on Caliban starting to feel more and more distant from the Imperium and from the Lion himself, because they hadn't seen him for so long and they had no interaction with him. And the sort of seething resentment of Caliban was starting to bubble up. And so members of the other knightly groups that hadn't been taken into the Legion were also starting to foment rebellion in the background. And they formed a secret group where they started to hatch plans to take over Caliban and essentially take it out of the Imperium, which they had a reasonable amount of support for amongst the general public. And also, as the heresy starts to occur, Chaos Sorcerers come to Caliban and start to hatch their own plots as well of rebellion. And because, of course, turning a recruitment world for a Legion into one of their own worlds, or just destroying it outright, would be a big blow to the Imperium. So you've got all of this going on in together, where you've got these three kind of strands of rebellion starting to emerge on Caliban. And the Lion is nowhere to be seen. He's not only is he not around, he's not even talking to these people. So Luther has to deal with this all himself. And to start off with, Luther is carrying on his role as essentially the Lion's deputy, and he's trying to hold things together. He's trying to repress these rebellions when they occur, trying to investigate why they are happening and so on, and trying to get to the bottom of things. But eventually he starts to go down the path of worshipping chaos himself. Now, he doesn't really know this, but he starts to read more and more forbidden lore. On Caliban, there is lots of hidden knowledge, there are books that you're not allowed to read that are locked away, and the Order has collected a lot of these books, and now Luther has access to them. And while he's there on Caliban, he started to read these books, and he started to find out things about the warp and about chaos, and he started to even practice chaos sorcery. And over time, he becomes eventually quite a powerful chaos sorcerer. And he decides that the only solution is to declare independence from the Imperium. So he, now knowing about the heresy, he decides he's not going to join Horus. He's not going to become a member of the heresy. He's not going to be one of Horus's followers. But at the same time, he doesn't want to follow the Lion or the Imperium, who he and now a growing number of people on Caliban blame for all of their problems. So the Lion eventually returns to Caliban at the end of the heresy and finds that the planet has gone into rebellion under the leadership of Luther. And of course, the Lion, being the Lion, it is enraged and decides to immediately launch an attack. Now, during this attack, famously, Caliban, the planet, is destroyed, and only the rock, which is the stronghold of the Order, remains. Also, the Lion faces Luther in single combat, and although the Lion is a Primarch, Luther is boosted by Chaos powers and is a very powerful sorcerer now. They do fight for a while, but eventually the Lion manages to wound Luther to the point where he's incapacitated. And the Chaos powers, seeing that their plan has failed, that Luther's not going to win, they withdraw their power from him and knock him down. And he's there at the Lion's mercy. But the Lion can't bring himself to kill Luther. So there is some remaining connection, some remaining affection from the Lion to Luther. And so much so that he can't kill him. Which is, I think, quite telling, because the Lion is not the sort of person that holds like these kind of sentimental connections, and you would expect the Lion just to kill him instantly, but he doesn't. And Luther gets a kind of a moment of clarity where he realizes what he's done and where he's the kind of the how far he's gone, the path he's walked down without realizing, and feels like remorse and guilt for what he's done, and is essentially driven insane. The Lion is also mortally wounded, and both of them are taken onto the rock. And that's it. That is the story of Luther. So how much do you blame Luther for what happened to him, and how much really is the Lion's fault? I mean, he does treat Luther extremely poorly, and for that one moment of weakness, he is punished with banishment, essentially. And a world that was always on the edge of corruption, of chaos, was abandoned also by the Lion, and really was inevitably going to lead to rebellion. The Lion basically gets his parenting skills from the Emperor, and he does behave a lot like the Emperor in this situation. You know, he just disappears onto the Great Crusade, forgets about Caliban, and comes back to it, finds it in rebellion. What can you expect if you abandon your world for 50 years, leaving people in charge of you just given a brutal punishment to for no apparent reason as far as they can determine? It is kind of like he planted the seeds of rebellion himself, almost. So there you go. Maybe if the Emperor had been a better parent to the Lion would have been a better parent to the Dark Angels, and they would never have had this fall. Who knows? Let me know what you think in the comments. Thanks for watching, and I will see you next time.